What is positively popping, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today, I thought we would stop and rank all 11 2023 comic book films. At number 11, we have Shazam! Fury of the Gods. This was one that I kind of avoided for a little while. I wasn't really interested in it. The marketing was terrible. They spoiled the entire movie. When I finally did watch it, it was about as bad as I expected it to be. There was absolutely almost nothing redeeming about this film. It's not the worst DCEU movie. That's about the best that I can say about it. One of the biggest complaints about the first film is Asher Angel and Zachary Levi's versions of Shazam and Billy Batson being almost completely different characters. I would say that they have not worked that issue out in this film. In fact, it's actually arguably worse because all of Asher Angel's scenes were practically cut, or practically all of them were cut, and it's mainly led to Zachary Levi to stay as the Shazam persona. The effects are atrocious for about 85% of the film. There are a couple of really cool shots. There's a shot with like the dragon and him, and it's lightning. And I think that's that's honestly an amazing shot. It's probably one of my favorite shots I've ever seen. The rest of the movie is nowhere near as good as that shot. If the rest of the movie was as good as that shot, I probably wouldn't be at number 11. At number 10, we have The Marvels. This was a strange one, to be sure. So, I have a love for every single MCU movie. Good, bad, doesn't matter. And I think at the MCU's absolute worst, it is still watchable. I would say that the absolute worst MCU movie is Black Widow, and even then, I find a lot to love in that film. The Marvels, however, is the first time that I have almost completely disliked an MCU film. There are aspects that I love about it, but almost all of it I do not like. It's fun once. It's like fun the first time you see it, and after that, you can probably never count on watching it again. The only reason I'll be watching it again is because of marathons and just, conclusion and for completion's sake. But it is a montage of a movie. It is choppy, and it has almost no plot at all. The best scene in the overall film is the end credit scene, which easily takes the cake, and it's only because there's an X-Men in it. This movie was surprisingly not great, and I'm kind of at that point with the MCU where I am starting to acknowledge that it's kind of gone down. I don't think it's dead. I do not think the MCU is dead. I don't think superhero movies are dead. It's painfully obvious that the superhero movies are not dead based on the movies that we got this year that are so well loved. One of them was being advocated for Best Picture. You can't, and it's one that deserves it. I don't think there's an argument there for superhero movies being dead. I think the MCU just needs to catch back up with itself and start doing quality over quantity. But this is something that I am not the first person to say. At number 9, The Killer. You might be thinking, what's this doing here? Well, actually, apparently, this film is based on a graphic novel. I did not know that until researching comic book movies of 2023, and this popped up, and I was like, what? That's crazy. How is this a comic book movie? But it is technically a comic book movie. This is David Fincher's The Killer. Not great. Not terrible. Well, arguable. It's very middle of the road. This to me feels like a Netflix film, which it is, but a very generic Netflix assassin killer film with David Fincher's name on it. It doesn't really ring an originality. I mean, it's like pro rich people. I didn't really connect with it. Michael Fassbender is absolutely wonderful. His performance is the best thing about the movie. The cinematography, the way it's shot overall and directed overall is really good, but the story itself is very generic. The soundtrack is incredible. Of course, a killer would listen to the Smiths. Only a killer would listen to the Smiths purely. There's a lot of great action. To be fair, there's only really one true action scene, and it's a really brutal scene. It's a really great action scene. But overall, it's kind of slow and pretty average. This was one that I was really looking forward to this year. And unfortunately, I was very, very disappointed with what the outcome was. At number 8, The Flash. The Flash is definitely not the film that everyone in Hollywood was kind of amping it up to be, saying that it was like the best film since Jesus Christ, basically. I don't think that this movie is that at all. However, I honestly don't think it's as bad as everyone else makes it out to be. I personally had a really fun time with it. It is truly a lot of fun. I think what matters most here is story. And in all honesty, I think that the story is pretty strong. I'm not the biggest fan of how they handle a whole lot of things, character-wise. I think Michael Keaton's Batman, it could have been handled a little bit better. Sasha Calle as Supergirl is fantastic. Easily my favorite part of the movie. I think the film is fine. It's a lot of fun. It's a great time travel adventure film, but it's not anything great. It was definitely not worth the 10-year wait. The practical 10-year wait for this movie with its director switching and its absolutely atrocious production history. I would not say it was worth the wait at all. However, if this film were to be announced the year right before that it was coming out, I think this would have been a fair film to have released. Obviously, visual effects, not good. It's that simple. It's not good. However, I personally really liked where the story goes throughout the whole film. The story of Barry Allen just wanting to save his mother from being murdered is very relatable, and I honestly think that the finale of this movie, where he talks to his mom as a stranger, as his older self, is an amazing scene. I love that scene. Is the movie overall as good as that scene? No. The obvious comparison is Spider-Man No Way Home, but these stories are very different. Personally, I think that Spider-Man does a way, way better job at telling its story than this movie does, but Flash still gets its story across in a fairly decent way, and I think there are a bunch of aspects that can be really enjoyed here. And however you feel about this movie, I think you have to appreciate that Ezra Miller's punishment was being stuck in the George Clooney Batman universe. That is the biggest and best punishment they could ever receive, and probably ever will receive. At number 7, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. I don't hate this movie as much as everybody else does. I really don't hate this movie at all. I think the worst part about this movie is its setting and the fact that they took the charm of Ant-Man out. It's hard to really like the premise of Ant-Man, which is he is small in normal-sized world, and make him go to a place where we cannot relate with his abilities, where his abilities kind of feel meaningless, where being giant doesn't really feel incredible and being small doesn't really feel like fun. I think the film does a really good job introducing Kang, which I know right now we don't really know where that's going. However, I think it would be really stupid of them to not bring Kang back. In fact, the worst thing they could do at this point is completely switch out the direction that they were going in the first place, which obviously is a little hard to tell what direction they're going for, even though we already technically know what it is, but they've not done a great job of showing that direction. It's weak, but I have a lot of fun with it. I genuinely really like the Michael Douglas, Hank Pym, Ant-Man scene when he sends all the ants after Kang. I personally really like that scene. That might be my favorite scene in the movie. I know, kind of crazy, but it's kind of cool to see Hank Pym be Ant-Man, because we never really got to see that in the other movies. It is very forgettable, but I think when I watch it, there's a lot that I still enjoy about it. MODOK, I feel, is nowhere near as bad as anyone makes him out to be. Yes, there's some dumb stuff with him saying he's an Avenger at the end of his life. I think this is the best thing that they could have done for a live-action version of MODOK. Does he look great every single time? No. The visual effects in general kind of lack throughout the entire film. But I think as an overall movie, it is decent. I think where this movie really fails is how ambitious it tries to be. It should have just tried to stay as a small, pun intended, Ant-Man movie. At number 6, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. This is the absolute finale of the DCEU. It is finally over. After this movie, we will be moving on into the DCU with James Gunn being the overseer of everything. I am very excited to finally see this new universe. I think the DCEU had a complete stumble of a run, and I think most people probably think that way too. This is not the strongest conclusion to that universe, but I think this movie was a lot of fun. I think compared to the first film, it's about the same. I don't really think that there's a huge difference between the two, other than the fact that the second one is just dumb and fun. The first one is very boring and it drags for the first hour and a half of the film, and the final 30 to 40 minutes is nothing but pure sci-fi, fun, and adventure. And I think with the second movie, they really saw that that's what worked about it, and they just made an entire movie that feels like the third act. And I think that really services this movie well. It doesn't make it a great movie, but it makes it a very fun movie. What really contributes the most to that is Jason Momoa and Patrick Wilson's chemistry. They're so much fun. They're so good together. I think the first movie had this kind of dynamic, probably would have been just as good, but you can't really do that when Orm is the bad guy. And they took out Amber Heard for the most part. She only had like 3 lines in this movie. Surprisingly, she was in it for more than I thought she would, but she only had like 3 lines. I think as a conclusion to the DCEU, it is quite the stumble. But this is the conclusion of the triumphant catastrophe that was the DCEU, and I am ready to move on to the next. We enter the top 5 with number 5, Extraction 2. This is another one that I did not know was a comic book film. This is based on a graphic novel called The Cuidad. I know absolutely nothing about it, and that is as far as my knowledge goes on that, but it is based on a comic book, so it counts. Extraction 2, I personally think, is better as a action film. Story-wise, I think the first film is better, but the action in this film is so good. There is a 21-minute action scene, one take, and it is incredible. It is one of the best action scenes ever. This movie is nothing but pure action. I think if you like action, this movie is a must-see for you. This one and the first one, honestly. I think what is so good about these two movies, and specifically this one, is it has allowed us to see Chris Hemsworth act more as a actor and not as a character. He obviously puts a lot of effort into his performances as Thor, but here is just a different side that we don't really get to see him play often. And it helps that Tyler Rake is just a cool, badass character. I think if you really enjoyed the first film, or if you are just a huge action fan, this is truly a movie must see. At number 4, we have Blue Beetle. This is the movie that everyone couldn't decide whether it was in the DCEU or the DCU, but we now know is a part of the DCEU. What's so unfortunate about that is this movie really isn't that bad. It's very generic, it's very formulaic, but it's got a lot of heart. There's a whole lot to love about this movie. It is so much fun. The character dynamics are incredible. Something that kind of worried me going into it was how they would treat the family. I was worried that they would be treated more as like one-note jokes, but they have a lot of emotional moments in this film, some surprising emotional moments in this film. and they add so much to this movie. This movie really wouldn't even have as much heart as it does without the family aspect. Zolo Maridueña is an incredible casting choice. He is so much fun. He is very charismatic and brings a lot of joy to this character. I think he was a perfect cast as Blue Beetle, and I really hope that he folds over into the next universe because he's the best thing about this movie, hands down. Obviously, where this movie fumbles a lot is its villains. The villain that he fights in the movie is very underdeveloped until the very end, where we see that he could have been a very interesting character. And the main villain overall is just not good. She absolutely sucks. She blows cheeks. She's terrible. Basically, her entire character is pure like racism, which is not a bad trait to have in a villain because it makes them easily hateable, but that's kind of all she is just rich and racist. This is also the first film about a Latin American superhero, and in that aspect, the film is very respectful and tells this story with a lot of love and a lot of appreciation for the culture. I think that this film was very overlooked based on how generic it kind of looked, and to be fair, it is very generic, but it also has a lot of things that you won't find in any other superhero movie. It didn't deserve to bomb at the box office the way it did, but I also understand why it did. Number 3, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. This was the probably biggest surprise in terms of comic book films. I was rooting for this movie. I knew it was probably going to be a lot of fun, but I did not expect it to be as good as it is. I think it's kind of obvious by now that everything Seth Rogen touches kind of turns to gold, but this was a huge surprise, and I think what really surprised me the most was the cast. Nicholas Cantu, Shaman Brown Jr., Micah Abbey, and Brady Noon all capture these characters so purely and really show the teenage aspect of this film. That's what's the best part about this film, is that it leans into the teenage mutant part. The animation is incredible. It's a great mix of Spider-Verse and claymation and this like weird chunky kind of ugly drawing aspect of it. I was never a huge fan of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but this movie made me a fan of TMNT, and I'm very, very excited to see where this series goes. This cast was incredible. The animation is phenomenal, and the movie overall is just a whole lot of fun and so pure, so full of heart and soul. And it's specifically made for kids today. You can tell by the way that they act, the way that they talk, the slang that they use. It's very new age. Number 2, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Not only is this one of my favorite MCU films, but it's also one of the best comic book movies ever. James Gunn came in, he made an incredible finale to the best trilogy in the entire MCU, and it sits almost entirely outside of the MCU. Having this film focus on Rocket was an incredible decision. Bradley Cooper gives an amazing performance. If you ask me, he should probably be nominated for Rocket instead of Maestro. The music is so good. The action is so fun. It's very dark. It is probably the darkest MCU movie to date. It's the first MCU movie to drop the F-bomb, which is, we love that. I love that so much. I think that James Gunn has proved more than enough that he's capable of breaking the boundaries with superhero films. And I think he has done that so well with Guardians of the Galaxy 3. It is a great finale to this trilogy. It's a fantastic send-off to these characters and these actors that have played the characters for 10 years now. Everything about this movie is so good. It's very emotional. It's paced very well. It is a 2.5-hour movie, and it feels like it flies by in an hour and a half. It wasn't a surprise that this is the best MCU film of the year, but it was honestly a surprise with how good it was. Topping the first film, in my opinion, was a feat that probably couldn't have been done, and it did it. And it is now my top 5 MCU films. Number 1, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Obviously, I hadn't said it yet. I think it's pretty obvious that this is number 1. This is almost everybody's number 1 comic book movie of the year. this is honestly my movie of the year. This is arguably the best movie that came out this year, and I've seen a lot of movies. I feel that I am well versed in last year's films to say that this is probably the best movie that came out last year. Of course, that's just my opinion, but the film itself is incredible. It is animated gorgeously. This is probably the best animated movie of all time, both story-wise and animation-wise. The way that it uses the animation to tell the story and to further the plot and to show the emotion of the characters is phenomenal. Not to mention that the continuation off of the first movie with Miles and Gwen, and it only got better, is incredible. To have topped the first movie at all is a feat that honestly no one really expected. The first film is one of the best comic book movies of all time, easily the best Spider-Man movie of all time, and the fact that they topped both of those with this movie is astounding. It is simply wild. Yes, this movie ends on a cliffhanger, so technically you could argue that this isn't a complete movie, but I would argue that it is. It has an ending. The ending is Miles escaping the Spider Society and getting to the other universe to stop his dad from dying. Obviously, he doesn't really succeed at that because he ends up in the different universe, but the fact that this movie is as good as it is with being arguably unfinished, I think it speaks for itself. Performances all around are incredible. Shameik Moore is a definitive version of Spider-Man. If he wasn't already, he is now. He is Miles. Haley Steinfeld, Oscar Isaac, Jake Johnson, they are all incredible. They are all phenomenal. They all give brilliant performances as these characters. And I think that this is easily, without a shadow of a doubt, the best comic book movie to come out this year. It's one of the best comic book movies to come out ever. It is one of the best comic book movies. I think this is a film that you could argue is the best comic book movie ever. Do I personally think this is the best comic book movie? Maybe not. But I think that it is arguably the best comic book movie. I think it is an easy contender for the best comic book movie. And this movie alone is a reason why they should allow animated films into Best Picture category at the Oscars. That is going to do it for today's ranking. If you agreed or disagreed with any of my placings, which I know you did, you either agreed or you disagreed. Those are literally the two options. But I know that a lot of you probably disagreed with some of these. A lot of you probably agreed. So let me know, what'd you agree with? What'd you disagree with? Let's have a conversation. I plan on dropping a ranking video of all 2023 films that I saw. And I also want to do a Oscars predictions video. Those should be dropping here very, 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 very soon. Just depends on how fast I can get them out. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. And remember, always sneeze into your elbow. It's the law. All right, bye.